When I reviewed the Atari 50 collection over at Digitally Downloaded, I'll leave a link in the description below if you want to go read that, a couple of years ago, I declared it to be the gold standard for retro game collections, and that's a view I still hold today because Digital Eclipse's setup of a mix of game titles to play, plus a museum-style timeline with interviews and press clippings and lots of other bits of interesting information, gives gamers a significantly better context in which to both enjoy those games as playable artifacts, but also to compare versions and understand the history of the time. And it sits in such a stark contrast to the many retro collections out there that just throw in a bunch of ROMs, maybe a scanline filter if you're lucky, and call it a day. It's just so much better. So I've kept a keen eye on the various collections that they've released ever since that came out. The newest cab off the rank for the Atari 50 package is DLC in the form of the Namco Legendary Pack. It's a collection of titles and a new museum-style timeline that explores the intertwining fortunes of Namco and Atari in the 1970s and through to about the mid-1980s. And obviously, there's a deep history to explore here, and some of the more interesting games of the era as well, though it's not as though Namco hasn't exactly been shy in both exploring and exploiting its back catalogue of retro games across a lot of platforms, but I feel like I own Namco Museum far too many times now. So what do you get? Well, you get a lot of Dig Dug. You get Dig Dug for the arcade, 2600, 5200, 7800 and Atari 8-bit computers. You get Gallagher for the 7800, Galaxian for the 2600 and 5200 and 8-bit computers, Pac-Man for the 2600 and 5200 and 8-bit computers, and Exevius for the arcade and 7800. Which means some, shall we say, choices were made. And some of these are really good choices. It's actually fascinating to see the evolution of how a title like Dig Dug works, because you can go all the way from the arcade original, which is still a great little game, through to the 8-bit and 7800 versions, which are quite pretty for their time, to the 2600 version, which, bless it, is not. But I actually think the 2600 version of the game has some charm, despite its blocky nature. And I'm also slightly enthralled and intrigued by the 7800 version, simply because I'd never really bothered to check it out before, and its close-in version of the Dig Dug map gives the game a different, slightly more claustrophobic feel. And look, Dig Dug is the title best represented in the Namco Legendary Pack, and while some of that does reflect what Atari could do with Namco's titles in this period, I mean, it would have been tricky at the time to get a 2600 version of Gallagher up and running, for example. The whole time I've been reviewing the pack, I've had the same thought over and over again. This is nice, this is good, but I do wish there was more. What kind of more? My most obvious wishlist item would be the superlative 2600 version of Ms. Pac-Man, because I think that's an actual classic of the 2600. Arguably one of the best games on the platform, certainly my personal favourite. And look, I do get that and I do know that the rights around Ms. Pac-Man are incredibly murky and difficult, and obviously money would have to change hands, and Namco doesn't really want to talk about it anymore. I feel like it's a missed opportunity not to at least represent it in the museum timeline. Even if the game isn't there, put up some detail around it. Make people aware of the context of that particular game and its conversions to Atari platforms. But no, it's completely missing. That one's understandable. Less understandable, though, are some of the other Namco titles which do exist on Atari platforms and where the rights should be fairly clear. So, for example, Atari 50, the full package, has Atari Lynx games in there because the Lynx was an important part of Atari's history. You know what's not in this collection, which would actually complement all those Pac-Man titles? Pac-Land for the Atari Lynx. Nice little version of the game, but it's just not here at all. And it just feels like it kind of tapers off at the 8-bit era as a result of that. It would have been nice to see some later Namco-Atari collaborations or even just conversions in here, and they're just not present. What are present are quite a few versions of Galaxian and Exevius, and look, honest personal admission here, I've always bounced off those games kind of hard. At the time, there were other space shooters I thought were better or more fun to play. Now, that's not a slam against them if you have strong nostalgic memories of either of those games, then yes, they're present. And of course, you do get the arcade version of Xevious. Again, not exactly a title that Namco has locked away in a closet for nobody to play for 40 years, but it's present as part of the collection. Not a thing that particularly enthralls me, but tastes can totally vary. The saving grace for the Namco Legendary Pack is that it's not particularly expensive. Listing at US $7.99, I don't actually have Australian pricing at the time of recording this review, but $7.99 US, so 12-ish dollars Australian, I guess. I will update with a link once I've got one, once it's live. But at that kind of price anyway, it is reasonable value, but I'm still going to stick to this idea that I kind of wish there was more. It's not overpriced, but I wish there was more because there could be more. And I do kind of feel that the target market, which is basically people my age for the most part, might have been willing to pay a little bit more to get a larger collection of titles or a more contextual history wrapped up in the package. The Namco Legendary Collection is good, but it feels like parts of what could have been here are held back, which stops it from being truly great. If you've already got Atari 50, it's a fairly easy recommendation because it's just not very expensive and it does add some interesting titles into the mix. But I kind of hope that they might do more. Maybe they're holding off for a Namco anniversary collection in this style. Absolutely. That would be a day one purchase from me. But in this case, yeah, it's good, but it could have been a bit more, I feel.